عليكم. بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ كنتم أعداء وألف بين قلوبكم فأصبحتم بنعمته إخوانا وكنتم على شفا حفرة من النار فأنقذكم منها كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تهتدون. صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين، خصوصا ثم إلى روح من بينهم. الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الناس من الجنة والناس. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل على رسولك سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم عليه. اللهم صلوات الله وسلامه وتحياته ورحمته وبركاته على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. صلاة وسلاما عليك يا رسول الله. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون
The Honorable Minister of Shipping, Ports, Rehabilitation and Reconstruction, Mr. M.H.M. Ashraff, Mr. Nisanka Vijayaratna, former Minister and Member of Parliament, Deshamanya, Dr. M.M. Shahabdeen, Kalasuri, Mr. Sivagoodnathan, Mr. Ali Aziz, Chairman of the Committee of Management of the Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund, and Mr. A.S.M. Muzammil, Secretary of the Board of Trustees, distinguished invitees, dear brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum. It is indeed my privilege to welcome all of you today to the 50th anniversary celebrations of the Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund. I stand before you today as the 50th President of the Chairman of the Board of Trustees. I, by the grace of Allah, am one of a long succession of eminent Muslims who have held office before me. They were certainly far-sighted persons who had the welfare of our community in their heart. Their mission, our founders' mission, was to ensure that no Muslim scholar capable and deserving residing in any part of the island is deprived of an education he or she deserves for want of money. They were fully aware that in spite of the visible minority of Muslims who live in urban areas, a large mass of our community were living well below the poverty line. This was the unseen majority, which most people did not see or did not wish to see. Our pioneers believed that education was the only way out of this morass. They launched this fund with minimum funfare and were able to collect a substantial amount of money to start the fund. Alhamdulillah, we, their successors, have tried our best to carry out their mission in the past 50 years. We have assisted over 2,000 scholars who, by the beneficence of Allah, have graced various posts from civil servants to doctors of medicine, professors, engineers, and so many others. We continue to do so even today. However, there has been one fly in the ointment. Our founders believed that the scholars who benefited would repay the amounts given to them, thereby helping succeeding scholars. But this unfortunately has not been the case, possibly because it is of our poor administration. We have had to go to the public for funds, and I must say that the response has been heartwarming. Our annual appeal and other requests have been well met. In fact, our announcement of our Golden Jubilee this year, early this year, has brought in, by the grace of Allah, nearly ₹1 million, of which about 500,000 was committed within the past 2 weeks. Our chairman will give you the details later on. If any of you who are present here today would like to commit yourself to support the fund, you would have all received a commitment form. I hope you could fill in and send it over to us by the conclusion of today's meeting. Mr. Ashraff, sir, it is certainly my privilege to welcome you as our guest of honor and keynote speaker. We are well aware of your several commitments, especially in these days, but we could not find a more competent person to do the honors to Muslim education than you, sir. Your commitment to Muslim education and to the welfare of Muslims in Sri Lanka is too well known. We have with us several distinguished speakers also who will speak to us. Thank you for your presence, and I now conclude my speech. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Memorable occasion, the celebration of the Golden Jubilee of the Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund as its chairman of the Committee of Management. It is an honor to hold this post in this historic 50th year, and it is also of interest that my father was the first chairman of the Committee of Management after initiating and founding the CMSF in 1945. The CMSF was inaugurated when Muslim education was at a low ebb despite the impetus given at the turn of the century by leaders such as Siddi Lebbe, Wapi Chimarika, ILM Abdul Aziz and others, encouraged by the Egyptian exile Arabi Pasha. Education was not given much importance by the Muslim community for various reasons, and they were far behind the other communities. It was observed that there were many bright students who had to abandon higher education due to financial difficulties. The CMSF was founded at a very opportune time to assist such students through financial means, and the CMSF has aided many students to qualify as civil servants, academics, professionals, administrative officers, teachers and others. The CMSF had the support of practically all leading Muslims and philanthropists at the time. The fact that the CMSF was one of the earliest charitable organizations to be incorporated and recognized for tax reliefs clearly showed that eminent Muslims are behind the movement. I do not want to delve into the history of the fund, but I would like to focus your attention on the far-sighted vision of the founders and their thinking in formulating the rules and regulations for the CMSF to continue ad infinitum. Many similar organizations give assistance to needy students as an outright grant. The founders of the CMSF devised an ingenious method for the CMSF to continue without encountering any difficulties to increase the funds year after year. The students are given interest-free loans which they must pay back when they are in a position to do so after completing their studies and obtaining employment. They are not accepting charity. They are morally obliged to repay in order to benefit others like themselves. It gives them a sense of dignity. This is in the best tradition of Islam with its sense of brotherhood. The founders envisaged that with repayments made by the scholars and possibly with the annual donations by way of gratitude, the CMSF will be a revolving fund. Thus, the charity of the donor lasts forever as his donation is recycled over and over again through the CMSF. This scheme did not materialize fully and has been supplemented by many other beneficiaries. Another novel feature introduced by the founders was the composition of the Board of Trustees. The various districts of the island were represented by the trustees of that district, who were required to go in search of needy students of more than average ability. Once assistance was granted, the trustees had to monitor the progress of the students and also ensure that repayments are forthcoming later. This scheme had a drawback in that the trustees were appointed for life. If the trustees live long, we have found that their active participation is inversely proportional to their increase in age. This is a fact of life. This problem, coupled with the increase in population manifold and the demarcation of the districts as a result, caused difficulties for the trustees to carry out their responsibilities. Therefore, we are in the process of revising the rules and regulations of the main act of incorporation to suit future needs. From the very beginning, the CMSF ran into liquidity problems. It is not the type of liquidity problem faced by commercial organizations. It is just that there were inadequate funds to give the large influx of needy students. Despite the tremendous improvement in the financial position of the CMSF, the so-called liquidity problem exists as the need for financial assistance is ever increasing and never ending. Apart from general donations, large contributions could be made to an endowment fund, and I would briefly familiarize you with the endowment fund scheme of the CMSF. At the inception of the CMSF, many philanthropists founded scholarships in memory of their loved ones for a contribution of rupees 5,000. The intention was to invest these monies appropriately so as to derive an income to cover the assistance to scholars without eating into the capital. This was also fine financial thinking of the founders for the perpetuity of the CMSF. However, the need for assistance by students was so demanding that the capital was frittered away. In the 1960s and 1970s, due to lack of financial support, possibly aggravated by the economic and social situation in the country, the Board of Trustees and the Committee of Management continued to function under great difficulties. The award of scholarships were restricted to undergraduates, and that too to professional courses based on the thinking that professionals will serve a more useful purpose to the Muslim community. The early 1980s saw a turning point in the history of the CMSF. A new endowment fund scheme was introduced in 1984. with professional management, I mean financial management. You would observe that the present committee comprises of many accountants. This endowment scheme attracts a more affluent in the community. The minimum donation is rupees 50,000 and the donor would name the endowment scholarships in memory of loved ones. The endowment funds will remain intact and grow in perpetuity as each year a share of the CMSF's investment income attributable to each endowment fund will be used to educate one or more poor students. This scheme is quite popular and has become the mainstay of the CMSF. At present, the CMSF is administering 60 endowment funds. It's increased today on behalf of the donors with a capital contribution of over rupees 4 million. Unlike in the past, there are many organizations granting assistance to students. We have observed that needy undergraduates receive either a Mahapola scholarship or a bursary. In addition, some obtain assistance from not one but many organizations, thereby receiving far in excess of their requirements, which they do not divulge. We think that this should be prevented as there is a tendency to waste money and shut out deserving students. When such instances are detected, assistance has been stopped. The students should be made to realize the difficulties of obtaining financial help and appreciate the services rendered by the CMSF and other organizations. I would like to suggest that there must be coordination of all such organizations in this field to avoid duplication. In recent years, the CMSF has undertaken to manage the scholarships of few organizations, and it is our intention to do so for others. For example, we manage the Al-Ajil Scholarship Fund. Much water has flowed under the bridge since the CMSF was inaugurated 50 years ago. There have been many far-reaching changes in the education policies of the government, the increase in the number of universities resulting in the increase of undergraduates, and the very thorny problem of refugee students due to their being displaced from their homes. The number of students seeking financial assistance has increased phenomenally. The cost of education has escalated, and the refugee problem has aggravated the situation. Therefore, the CMSF cannot continue to assist only undergraduates. Assistance must be broad-based to include those capable and deserving students who have been unsuccessful in entering the universities. There are many other courses available but very costly, and without financial backing, only few will be able to follow these courses. Very recently, the CMSF has supplemented the expenses of a bright student following a course in computer engineering at Aberdeen University in the UK. The CMSF is now prepared to assist those other than undergraduates. Another area of assistance that the CMSF is considering is to finance students to follow higher education in Islamic studies and the Arabic language in universities abroad. The community needs people with such training who will be an asset in the teaching of Islam in schools and universities. This was done at the inception when the CMSF sent 4 scholars to Al-Azhar University in Cairo. Today, the Muslim community faced with the problem of Muslim refugees from the north and east who for over 5 years have been living in refugee camps. The youth among them need assistance to continue studies at all levels, and the CMSF cannot leave this field of assistance to other welfare organizations. The Sri Lanka Muslim Refugee Assistance in UK has channeled their educational funds to the CMSF, and we hope that the new Southeastern University in the Southeastern University set up recently in the Eastern Province on the initiative of Honorable Minister. Finally, I would like to stress that the Muslims are no longer backward. Muslims are now holding top academic posts in the universities and top government posts. As a whole must suffer. Assalam.
Our next speaker is the senior civil servant who held several important positions both in the public and private sector.
Words. On this very, very important occasion of this great organization, the Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund, having completed 50 years. 50 years is too long a period for any institution to survive. And if it has survived 50 years, that shows it is well structured, well planned, well established, and above all, it is needed by the society which is intended to serve. Now, most of the credit that goes to this organization, the success of the organization, belongs to the late M.H.M. Aziz. I don't think anyone will disagree with that. He had the vision, the foresight, and the great idealism to set up an organization like this. He set it up with a vision. It is not only just a financing organization. It is something much more than pure financing. It has an ideal. It had well planned out objectives. I went on a weekend, and he was there, his wife, a very genius, that's by the way. Anyway, after I got into the civil service, I used to meet him practically every week. And we used to discuss problems of the Muslim community, problems of education, problems of the Muslims in the world, problems of the world, our Sri Lankan problem, so on and so forth, endlessly, sometimes for hours. He used to be an inspirer. And one thing very, very significant about him was his great interest in Tamil literature. He would quote from Thiruvalluvar, almost an encyclopedia. Karka Kashadara Katravi Katravin Nirkadar Kuttaha, he would go on like that. Learn throughout your life. And having learned, act according to that learning. This used to be his watchword, and he would inculcate this into youngsters who sat around him. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund is really much more than a revolving fund organization. It has an ideal, an objective, that is to revolutionize the Muslim community from its slumber, deep-rooted lethargy, into a dynamic community, looking forward to with optimism, to facing the problems of the world. Whenever I attend Muslim functions, an oft-repeated theme is, oh, we are very backward in education, we are very backward, we don't have enough people, and especially when there are foreign diplomats. This used to be a hackneyed subject. Now, it is true that once upon a time, maybe about 20 years ago, we were backward, not due to any inherent defect in our intellect, not due to any lack of enthusiasm, but just that some of our rich families were not interested in education. Some of the poor students who were interested in education didn't have the financial wherewithal. That is where Mr. Aziz filled that vacuum. He not only motivated youngsters to study, but he also gave the financial wherewithal. In a very respectable, dignified way. He used to repeat, this is a loan which you repay. So that a young aspiring student is given income support to pursue his studies without due injury to his dignity. So, now whenever we are told that we are backward, I used to question, are we really backward? Today, we have just seated in front of us an elitist group of eminent intellectuals. We see Honorable Attorney General, we see the Auditor General, 3 professors of surgery, medicine, pharmacology are here. I don't know the pharmacologist, no, but anyway, he is a professor. Muslims hold very eminent positions with distinction. So let us shed once and for all this inferiority complex that there is something wrong with us. that we are not the best in this country. We are intellectually achieved in this country. We are capable. And we belong to a tradition which gave the light of learning to the whole world. Cordova and Alhambra taught the basic principles of the scientific method to the then barbarians of Europe. And the light of learning spread from these universities to Europe. And something happened in the history of Islam. Some accident or some lethargy, some lapse, which made us insular, dogmatic, fanatical, and say, well, look, what we say, what we think is the only truth and nothing but the truth. No. We have to communities, their religions, their cultures, and learn the art of coexistence and contribute. All this means education, and education also means resources. I am very glad Honorable Ashraff is here, and he has established an Eastern, something like the Aligarh University, and be another seat of learning, not only to the Muslims, but to all our other brothers in this country. Now, I don't know, I have exceeded my 10 minutes. For the first time, Aziz symbolized a revolution in the Muslim community, in that Muslim leadership at every level was identified with wealth. You go to any village, the M.H.M or the lead be the trend. We need people, we need leaders who are just not rich people, but who also. I wanted to speak, gentlemen, but there is one or two disquieting facts in our community which I thought I'll briefly touch on. So why it's the emergence of a middle class that symbolizes the progress of a community. Now this also creates its own problems. Well, this is a matter for sociologists to think about and find out what the problems are, find solutions. I'm not here, I will take a long time. But side by side with progress in education, we find a deterioration in another aspect of our life. One is on the economic front. Now, public company manned largely by the Muslims? I do not know. I personally do not know that. We still, in our economic endeavors, adopt exchange, a soul just for a commission. The Main Street methodology of doing business, just buying and selling.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. ஆக்ரோஷன சக்தி என்னை இழுக்கின்றது எப்பொழுது. அசீஸை நாங்கள் ஒரு தெய்வம் போலதான் கருதுகின்றோம், வணங்குகின்றோம் என்று கூட நான் சொல்வேன். அல்ஹம்துலில்லாஹ், praise be to the Lord. ஆனால் எங்களுடைய அசீஸ் அவர்களை பற்றியும் நாங்கள் செல்கின்ற இடத்திலே ஒரு சில நேரமேனும் ஒரு சில வார்த்தைகளேனும் சொல்லாவிட்டால் நாங்கள் நன்றி கடனை மறந்தவர்களாகி விடுவோம் என்று அஞ்சுகிறோம். நான் ஜைரா கல்லூரி மாணவன். அதற்கு முன்பு மர்ஹூம் அசீஸ் அவர்களைப் போல அவருடைய ஜப்னா ஹிந்து காலேஜில் நான் படித்தேன். அங்கு அவரை முதலாக அந்த யங் ஹிந்து என்ற அந்த ஸ்கூல் மேகசீனில் அவரை படத்தை பார்த்த உடனே ஃபிலிம் ஸ்டார் போல இருந்தார். நான் உண்மையில் அந்த படத்தை வெட்டி வச்சிருந்தேன் நான் நீண்ட காலமாக. அதனால என்னவோ உயர் படிப்புக்காக கொழும்புக்கு வந்தபோது எனது மைத்துனர், என்னுடைய அக்காவுடைய கணவர், அவரும் அசீஸ் அவர்களும் யூனிவர்சிட்டியில் ஒருமிக்க படித்தவர்கள். அவரை கண்ட உடனே என்ன எங்கே கொண்டு போற, நீ அங்கே தைரா கொண்டு வர, நான் அவனை பார்த்துக்கொள்றேன், யூனிவர்சிட்டிக்கு அனுப்புறேன்னு சொன்னார். அவர் சொன்ன வாக்கு தவறவில்லை, என்னை யூனிவர்சிட்டிக்கு அனுப்பி. நான் ஒரு மனிதனாக இன்று வாழ்கின்றேன் என்றால் எங்களுடைய அசீஸ் அவர்களுக்கு அந்த பெருமை சாரும் என்று சொல்கின்றேன். ஒவ்வொரு வகையிலேயும் அவர் எங்களுக்கு வழிகாட்டியாக இருந்து வந்திருக்கின்றார். அசீஸ் அவர்களுடைய பெருமைகளை பற்றி இங்கே டாக்டர் ஷஹாதீன் அவர்கள் பேசியிருக்கின்றார். அசீஸ் அவர்களை பற்றி நான் நினைக்கின்ற போது உடனடியாக இந்த மெடோ ஸ்வீட் இல்லத்தை தான் பார்ப்போம். மாணவனாக இருந்த போது அவரோட அவ்வளவு பழக்கம் இல்லை. ஏனென்றால் ஸ்டூடெண்ட் டீச்சர் அந்த டிஃபரன்ஸோடு அவர் பழகினார். எப்பொழுதும் அந்த இடத்துல வச்சுக் கொள்ளார் ஆக்களை. இவரே எந்த இடத்துல வைக்கணும்னு அவருக்கு தெரியும். ஆனால் பின்னர் நான் பல்கலைக்கழகத்தில் இருந்து வெளியேறி அவரிடம் வேறு சந்தர்ப்பங்களில் சென்ற போதெல்லாம் என்னோடு இருந்து நல்ல அளவிலாவி பேசுவார். மெடோ ஸ்வீட் அந்த கரையிலே அவருடைய காரியாலயத்தின் வாசலிலே ஒரு ஈசி சேர் இருந்தது. அதிலே படுத்திருந்தோண்டு அவருடைய பாரியாரை கூப்பிடுவார், ஜூல் என்று கூப்பிடுவார். இங்கே உங்களுடைய ரத்னநாதன் வந்திருக்குது, அவருக்கு டீ கொண்டு வரணும். இனி அவ அனுப்பிவிடுவா. நல்ல இதாக இருந்து சாப்பிடுவோம். சில நேரம் பைட்ஸ் கூட வரும். அந்த மெடோ ஸ்வீட்டில் எப்பொழுதும் ஒரு மாமரம் இருக்கின்றது, அநேகமாக இருக்குன்னு தான் நினைக்கின்றேன். அவருக்கு பிறகு நான் அந்த பக்கம் போகவில்லை. என் நினைவாக அந்த மரம் அங்கே இருக்கும்னு நினைக்கின்றேன். எப்பொழுதும் எங்களுக்கு ஒரு தந்தை போல வீட்டுக்கு கூட வருவார். பல விஷயங்களை பற்றி எல்லாம் பேசுவார். என்னுடைய குடும்பத்தோடு நல்ல நெருங்கிய அதே நிலையிலே தான் எங்களுடைய அமைச்சர் அஷ்ரஃப் அவர்கள் இன்று இருக்கின்றார் என்பதை காண்கின்ற போது நான் பெரும் மகிழ்ச்சி அடைவது. அஷ்ரஃப் அவர்கள் எனது ஃப்ரெண்ட் பிலாசபர் அண்ட் கைட், நண்பன், தத்துவஞானி, வழிகாட்டி. எனக்கு மட்டுமல்ல, எனது மகள். அவரிடம்தான் சட்டக் கல்லூரியில் வெளியேறிய பின்னர் அப்ரண்டிஸாக இருந்து பிறகு அவரோடு இருந்தான் தொழில் செய்தார். பிறகு லண்டனில் சொலிசிட்டராக இருக்கின்றார். அவர் கல்யாணம் கட்டி பிள்ளை எல்லாம் அடிக்கடி அக்டோபர் 23 இவரோடு டெலிஃபோனில் கதைப்பார். அவருடைய பிறந்த தினம். எனது மகனும் அதே நேரத்தில் தான் பிறந்தார். அசீஸை பற்றி நாங்கள் எல்லாம் பேர்க்கின்றோம் பத்திரிகை ஆசிரியர் என்ற முறையில். அவர் ஒரு சிறந்த எழுத்தாளர், சிறந்த இலக்கியவாதி, சிறந்த பேச்சாளர். ஆனால் சமூக நலம் விரும்பி எல்லோரும் நான் இன்புற்று இருக்க வேண்டும் என்ற ஒரு பெரிய எண்ணம் கொண்ட ஒரு பெருந்தகை எங்களுடைய அசீஸ் அவர்கள். உண்மையிலே இங்கே தந்த அந்த நூலில் பின்பக்கத்திலே இருக்கின்றது, திருக்குரானிலே இவ்வாறாக இந்த அறிவுக்கு முக்கியத்துவம் கொடுக்கப்படுகின்றது என்று. அதை எல்லாரும் நீங்கள் படிக்க வேண்டிய அறிவை பற்றி சொல்கின்ற போது, தமிழ் அறிவை பற்றி சொல்கின்ற போது, நான் எனது குருவானவர் இங்கே முன்னே இருக்கின்றார், M.H.M கமால்தீன் அவர்களை நான் மறக்க முடியாது. எனது தெய்வம் போன்றவர். எனக்கு தமிழ் ஏதாவது தெரியும் என்றால், நான் உண்மையிலே கொழும்புக்கு வந்தபோது நான் தமிழ் ஒரு பாடமாக எடுக்கவில்லை ஜைரா கல்லூரியில். நான் இங்கிலீஷ் படிக்கணும்னு வந்தேன். அவர்தான் எனக்கு இதில் ஊக்கப்படுத்தி இதையெல்லாம் இந்த தமிழ் படிக்க வேணும் ஒரு ஆர்வத்தை ஏற்படுத்தியவர் எங்களுடைய பெரியார் கமால்தீன் அவர்கள். எங்களை எல்லாம் அழைத்து சென்றார். முதலாவது தமிழ் மாநாடு யாழ்ப்பாணத்தில் நடைபெற்ற போதெல்லாம் அவரும் வந்தார், நாங்களும் போயிருந்தோம். அன்று தொடக்கம் இன்று வரை எனக்கு பல விஷயங்களிலேயும் ஒரு தந்தை போல அவரை பார்த்தா எனக்கு தலை நிறைச்சிட்டு அவருக்கு நிறைக்க இல்லை. ஆனால் என் தந்தை போல ஒரு மூத்த தமிழாரை போல பல விஷயங்களையும் உதவி வருகின்றவர் எங்களுடைய கமால்தீன் அவர்கள். அவருடைய ஆதரவும் எங்களுடைய அசீஸ் அவர்களுக்கு அன்று இந்த தமிழ் பணியை பொறுத்தவரையில் இருந்தது என்பதனை நான் கூறுவதில் பெருமைப்படுகின்றேன். அசீஸ் அவர்கள் ஜைரா கல்லூரி அதிபராக இருந்தபோது அங்கே இருந்த நூல் நிலையம் எத்தனை சிறப்பாக இருந்தது என்பதனை அண்மையிலே அங்கே சென்று பார்த்தபோது எனக்கு உண்மையிலே கவலை ஏற்பட்டது. இதனை எங்களுடைய புதிய அதிபர் ஃபுர்கான் அவர்களும் எங்களுடைய அசீஸ் அவர்களும் அலி அசீஸ் அவர்களும் ஆக வேண்டிய வேலைகளை செய்வார்கள் என்று நான் நம்புகின்றேன். இந்த சபையிலே என்னோடு படித்தவர்கள் இருக்கின்றார்கள், ஜஹான் காசிம் அவர்கள் இருக்கின்றார்கள், இன்னும் பலர் இருக்கின்றார்கள். பெயர் சொல்லிக் கொண்டு அந்த நேரம் போகாது. ஆனால் அந்த அசீஸுடைய அந்த எண்ணம் எங்களுக்கு எப்பொழுதும் ஒரு கரங்களை விளக்கமாக வழிகாட்டியாக வாழ்க்கையிலே எங்களை ஒரு நல்ல வழியில் செலுத்தி வரும் என்பதனை நான் திடமாக நம்பிக்கொள்ளலாம் என்று இதை கூறி வைப்பதில் மகிழ்ச்சி அடைகின்றேன். அசீஸ் அவர்கள் ஜைராவிலே இருந்தபோது இந்த இஸ்லாமிக் சென்டர் என்று அவருக்கு அது ஒரு பிரெயின் செயல், அவருக்கு நெடுக ஒரு ஆர்வம் இருந்தது. அந்த ஆர்வத்தை மருதானியில் செய்ய முடியாது என்றாலும் எனக்கு மருதானி என்ற உடனே பல சந்தோஷம் என்றால் நான் மரிய கடைவாசி. மரிய கடையில் செய்கிற எல்லா விளையாட்டும் எனக்கு தெரியும். நான் அதுக்குள்ள சும்மா நெடுக திரிகிற ஆக்கள். அந்த அசீஸ் அவர்களுடைய கனவு ஒரு இஸ்லாமிய பல்கலைக்கழகம் இருக்க வேண்டும், அந்த இஸ்லாமிக் சென்டர். அதுக்காகத்தான் வெளிநாடுகளோடு கூட தொடர்பு கொண்டவர் செய்தார். இன்று எங்களுடைய அமைச்சர் அவர்கள் தென்கிழக்கு பல்கலைக்கழகத்தை எடுத்து தந்திருக்கின்றார். எங்களுடைய அமைச்சர் அஷ்ரஃப் அவர்கள் மனித நேயம் விரும்புவர்கள், மனிதனுடைய கஷ்டங்களை உணர்வர். சொல்ல வேண்டியதில்லை, சொல்லி செய்வார் பெரியதுன்னு சொல்வார். சிலர் சொல்லியும் செய்யாதவர்கள் இருக்கின்றார்கள். இவருக்கு சொல்ல வேண்டியதில்லை, எதையும் சொல்வார். ஒரு சின்ன உதாரணத்தை நான் சொல்கின்றேன். ஒரு முறை நான் சட்டக்கல்லூரியில் லெக்சர் பண்ணி போட்டேன். நாங்கள் லீகல் சிஸ்டம் இதெல்லாம் செய்கிறோம். வெளிக்கிட்டு போன போது இடையிடையே என்ன கோர்ட்டுக்கு போகிற நேரம் கூப்பிடுவார். ஒரு நாள் 84 நினைக்கும், இவர் அப்புறம் கல்முனையில இருந்து வந்திருக்கார்.
I made it a point to travel last night to Colombo because this was a function that I did not want to miss for two specific reasons. One, because of my personal friendship with the late Mr. M.H.M, and also because the golden anniversary of a great foundation like the Muslim Scholarship Fund deserves the fullest praise, and to participate in a ceremony of this nature gives the participants a sense of belonging to one of the great institutions that have grown up in Sri Lanka. I think it is said in the Tirukural that it gives great pleasure to parents to hear of their children praised in the assemblies of men. Changing it, I would say how happy the young Mr. Aziz would feel that his parents are honored in this august assembly as well as in the country. Mr. Aziz, as you all know, grew up in Jaffna, had a full education, imbibed the Tamil classics, but the society he knew and cherished no longer exists in the north. Had Mr. Aziz lived, it were added to his sorrow to see that full intellectual life in which he grew up has been destroyed by narrow exclusiveness. Mr. Aziz entered the university. He distinguished himself in studies and he followed up abroad the extensive foundations he had obtained in Sri Lanka. He entered the Sri Lanka Civil Service. As Dr. Sahabdeen pointed out, it was no mean honor at that time. Intellectually, in personality, and in contribution, he adorned the service in the elite echelons of the British period. During the war years as emergency AGA Kalmune, he took an interest in the people he was called upon to administer. He saw their weaknesses and he attempted to overcome the lacuna they were suffering from, namely lack of education. Talking of lack of education, I'd like to mention a little story. Some years ago, when I served in the Gaul district, I went for a Muslim function in one of the outlying towns. And I was talking to some people and I mentioned the value of education, because by that time I had come to realize the great work Mr. Aziz was doing. And this old Muslim gentleman told me, "Ane mahatyo nikan inte. Sivadei handuro matric pass keruwada. Yesus wanse inter vibhage gattada. Mahatyage buduhanduro BA pass keruwada. Mage nabituma PhD gattada. Ane mahatyo monada me katha karane adhyapane gana." I years later told this story to Mr. Aziz. I thought he would be amused as I had been amused. But he was very serious. He said, "This is what I am trying to overcome. A complete inability in the well-to-do sections of our community to realize the value of education. Education will not only improve the individual, it will have a complete impact on the entire community." This is what inspired Dr. Khalil. And before that,
Mr. Farooq Zawahir in UK, he has contributed one in the name of his brother Ashraff Zawahir, an additional amount to his fund. I will top it up later on. And we have Dr. M.H.M. Sahabdeen, who is giving a large donation.
Present and beyond.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulil kareem. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Ashraff al-Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. Mr. Chairman, Sali Aziz, Chairman of the Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund, Dr. Nisanka Vijayaratna, Dr. Shahabdeen, my friend Kalasuri, Mrs. Vigurnadan, Mr. Muzammil, ladies, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is not the first occasion that I have been called upon to be a chief guest at a function. Being a chief guest is the easiest thing that one can do. But in addition to being a chief guest, the Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund has called upon me to deliver a keynote address on a subject, Muslim education, past 50 years, present and beyond. A subject on which I do not feel that comfortable to speak on because of my incompetency. Mr. Chairman, in the first place, I am not an educationist myself. I feel very humble before this august audience that is full of intellectual dominance. Although I was given the responsibility of delivering this keynote address, few weeks ago, I must confess I started formulating my thoughts only since yesterday morning. You will therefore forgive me. Before I get on to the main subject of the Muslim education, it is my duty to say a few words about late A.M.A. Aziz. I was asking within myself the question as to how the Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund Management Committee decided to have me as the chief guest for this occasion and decided that I should deliver this keynote address. Then I answered the question in my favor. I thought I had some competence, that is not as a result of my own learning or standing in the field of education, but for several other reasons. I belong to the second generation of those who knew late A.M.A. Aziz very closely. The history of the All Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund starts with the history of the Kalmune Educational Society, which late A.M.A. Aziz founded when he was the government agent of the emergency Kacheri that was functioning in Kalmune, the village from where I hail. Not only that, the first meeting of the All Ceylon, the first meeting of the Kalmune Educational Society, the inauguration, the birth of this concept of the Muslim Scholarship Fund was at no other place except the house of my beloved uncle, late M.M. Abdul Majid Vanniya of Saindamardu, who happens to be my father's own brother. His son, the elder son, Mr. Fazil Majid, I find him in the audience today. I have another qualification, Mr. Chairman, to be associated with late Mr. Aziz. That is, my father's personal friendship. Ali Aziz may not be aware of. My father was one of those who were very closely associated not only with late Mr. Aziz, but also the mother of Ali Aziz. My third qualification is my own personal friendship with late A.M.A. Aziz. At the time I was a law student, reading for my law at the Ceylon Law College. I came to know him very closely. My interest in Islam, my interest in Tamil literature, my interest in Iqbal and his philosophy, my interest in the community development brought me close to A.M.A. Aziz. We are talking about the history of Muslim education over the last 50 years. The 1974 marks a watershed in the history of the Muslim education during the last 50 years. Mr. Kamaldeen is here. He will bear testimony to what I say now. The Muslim education that we are trying to understand during the last 50 years begin from 1945. It is a period that begins from 1945 to 1995 we are trying to discuss and understand. The 1974 marks the 30th year, 30th milepost in this long 50 years journey. That was the time Muslim education degenerated to such an extent that to the Muslim girls dance was made and was becoming almost compulsory in schools. It was at that time late A.M.A. Aziz guided youngsters like us and who finally ended up writing even a book titled அமைச்சரின் நடனமும் ஆலிங்களின் தாளமும், which means the dance of the minister and the tune of the ulamas. With all due respect to Dr. Badiuddin Mahmood, about whom I'll be making reference, during the last 1970-77 regime, the educational reforms that he brought about made almost compulsory aesthetic education, and that brought the exposure of the Muslim girls to dance. And in this history of the Muslim education, there was an occasion at Zaira College, Colombo, which is going to figure very prominently in my speech today, where Dr. Badiuddin Mahmood summoned the ulamas, all Ceylon Jamiatul Ulama, and told them the justification for introducing dance to the Muslim girls. And our ulamas, who had to be grateful to the Honorable Minister, could not say anything against him. That was the end of that conference. So our war against this dance started in 1974, and anybody reading that booklet will see that booklet had been dedicated to the memory of late A.M. Aziz. He used to speak to me every day. Those days, rarely I missed my morning prayers. If there was a call between 5 and 5:15, it would be from none other than late A.M. Aziz. Every day he would be calling me. Even the day on which he passed away, I had the good fortune of speaking to him. That was the magnetic attraction, the charisma that late A.M. Aziz had towards not only me, but towards anyone who came close to him. Mr. Chairman, the Kalmune Muslim scholarship was started in 1943, on the 14th of October 1943. Thereafter, we see the history of the Muslim Scholarship Fund. The subject I have been asked to speak today is the Muslim education over the last 50 years. You will forgive me because I have a problem with the subject itself. What do we mean by Muslim education? I wish to disagree with the concept of Muslim education. What do we mean by Muslim education? Is it the education that a Muslim receives from a school like Ananda College? Or is it an education that a Muslim child receives from a school like Zaira College? Or is it an education that a Muslim receives from a madrasa or Arabic college such as Nalimia Jamia? What makes an education Muslim? This is my question. Is it a myth, or are we talking about the history of education of the Muslim community of Sri Lanka? There is, I believe, a distinction between the history of education of the Muslims of Sri Lanka from the Muslim education that we are talking about. I feel there is nothing called Muslim education. There is a bed, a Muslim may sleep on that bed, you don't call it a Muslim bed. There may be a road on which a Muslim walks, you don't call it a Muslim road. There may be water that a Muslim may drink, you don't call it Muslim water. Similarly, a suitcase or a briefcase a Muslim may be carrying, are you going to call that suitcase a Muslim suitcase? Or a book a Muslim may be reading, are we going to call it and brand it as a Muslim book? I feel, Mr. Chairman, there is nothing called as Muslim education. When we are discussing and talking about Muslim education, we are talking about the history of education of the Muslim community of Sri Lanka and nothing else. Or we are talking about the history of the Islamic philosophy that was built into the curriculum of Sri Lankan educational system. In my speech, I wish to touch upon both the history of the education of the Muslims of Sri Lanka, as much as I would wish to talk about the emergence and fall of the Islamic philosophy from the Sri Lankan educational system. There was a time, Mr. Chairman, that the Muslims were not interested in formal education. Dr. Nisanka Vijayaratne in his speech narrated a story about how a Muslim businessman asked the question as to why one has to study. It is true, our Prophet ﷺ was an ummi. He was uneducated. He was unlettered. Lord Buddha did not go to a school. There are no history or historical records that Lord Jesus went to a school. That does not mean we come to the conclusion that we don't require education. The Muslim students were confined to the madrasas, which was known as maktab education, where they learned the basis of religion and the daily religious rituals. The consciousness that the Muslims must direct their attention to a more formal system of education was born as a result of the leadership given by late M.C. Sidilebbe, who can be described as the father of the formal education for the Muslim community. He was, of course, helped by people like Wapichi Marekar and Orabi Pasha, ILM Abdul Aziz, and later by Sir Muhammad Maka Maka. In 1892, he started the Zahira movement. Al-Madrasatul Zahira was established in 1892. He was assisted by people like Wapichi Mareka. Now we must understand the background, the historical background that necessitated Sidilebbe and others to demand and work for a religious-based education for the Muslims of this country. A religious-based education was felt as a need not only to the Muslims but also to the Hindus as well as the Buddhists. When you see Bab Sidilebbe on the one side, you also see people like Colonel Olcott, Anagarika Dharmapala on the Buddhist side, and Aramuga Navala on the Hindu side. There was this national movement which decried the Western education, which realized the pitfalls of the English education, which realized the ill effects of the English education, which led to conversions and religious conversions among all indigenous communities of Sri Lanka. The Hindus were converted, the Buddhists were converted. Alhamdulillah, it is a Muslim community that was spared of this historical misfortune. Some of us may recollect one of the resolutions passed by the All-Ceylon Jamiatul Ulama. They may not have existed at that time. The ulamas gave a fatwa that study of English language was haram. They prohibited it. That injunction saved, I believe, the Muslim faith in a historical perspective. Mr. Chairman, the education of the Muslims of Sri Lanka is therefore today on the day that you are celebrating the Golden Jubilee of the All Ceylon Muslim Scholarship Fund is 103 years old. I have been called upon to concentrate on the last 50 years. I see a lot of similarities between the educational history of the Muslims of Sri Lanka and the educational history of the Muslims of India. As much as the Sri Lankan Muslims did not want to study the English language, so the Muslims of India. There was a reason for that. The English education was not confined to imparting knowledge through English medium. The English education, whilst imparting knowledge, also introduced an alien philosophy, a Christian philosophy to the students. In the process, there were conversions. There was either a direct conversion or an indirect conversion. On some occasions, the Westerners, the Englishmen, succeeded in directly converting a Buddhist or a Hindu. If he failed to succeed in the direct conversion, he succeeded in the indirect conversion. A Christian mind, a Christian body, and a Christian soul. We Muslims believe, and Siva will agree with me, I think the Hindu philosophy also shares the same view. We believe in a soul, in a body, and a mind. I am not sure whether Buddhism believes in a soul. Certainly Buddhism talks of, Lord Buddha has talked about a body and a mind. What the Englishman wanted was, through English education, he wanted to convert the soul, he wanted to convert the body, he wanted to convert the mind. When he failed in that, he succeeded in converting the mind. There was an empty shell. Those Muslims who were educated, who went to the universities, who held very high positions in society, they were Muslims, they were labeled as Muslims. They were praying, no doubt. They were fasting, no doubt. They were going to Hajj once a year, no doubt. But their minds had been brainwashed. Inside their mind, they were not Muslims. There was no Islam in their ruh. This was the biggest problem that was discovered by not only the Muslim forefathers in education, but also by the forefathers in education among the Hindus as well as Buddhists. They decried the Western education and English education, which brought together with it a Christian philosophy. Those Muslims who were educated under those circumstances became very apologetic about Islamic philosophy. But the collective life of the people. Our prayers is collective. Individually you can pray. What is commendable is the collective life. The essential distinction between a Muslim ummah and other ummah is, in every other ummah, in every other community, it is the individuals who live. Of the educational history of the Muslims, I should say, was non-eventful. They have nothing much. The Muslim education that we are talking about today, with which the term I do not agree, begins its vigor only after 29 years. It coincides with the appointment of late Marhum T.B. Jaya as the principal of Colombo Zaira College. 1921. Now this is what late Jaya says about the Zaira College that he took over in 1921. The external appearance of the school was pathetic. There were 6 teachers and 59 students. Not a single furniture that could be described as good. The building was sufficient for a primary school, which was a haven of activities for the street urchins in the night. There was nothing attractive in its surroundings. There were shrub, bushes and jungles within 20 or 30 yards of its vicinity. People considered the Zaira College that Jaya took over as a resort of the antisocial elements. This is the Zaira that we see in 1921. I am bringing Zaira because the educational history of the Muslims of Sri Lanka cannot be understood and assimilated unless one knows the history of Zaira, the history of the Zaira movement. Sir Ivor Jennings, who was the first Vice Chancellor of the University of Ceylon, in his report gives the following figures. In 1927, there were only 3 out of 315 students, 3 Muslims out of 315. In 1942, there was only 25 out of 904 students. In 1946, you have 37 out of 1,302. And he says, between 1927 to 1947, the total increase of the student population had gone by 185%, whereas the total increase of the Muslim students went by 800%. This is something remarkable. The total increase among the normal, ordinary student population was only 185%, whereas the Muslim expansion, increase, was by 800%. And Sir Ivor Jennings attributes this outcome to the efforts over a period of 25 years by a single person and a single institution. That single person was none other than late T.B. Jaya, and that single institution is nothing other than Colombo Zaira College. Zaira's glorious story begins, I believe, with the appointment of T.B. Jaya in 1921. He was the principal of Zaira College till 1948, until he handed over the destiny of the education of the Muslims of this country in the hands of late A.M. Aziz, the father of Ali Aziz. So, Mr. Chairman, the 50 years that we are talking about is the last 3 years of T.B. Jaya and the most important years of A.M. Aziz at Zaira College. The education of the Muslims of this country was like an uncut diamond in the hands of T.B. Jaya. The polishing of the diamond was done by none other than late A.M. Aziz. T.B. Jaya, once again, is the first Muslim educationist who had the courage to define the purpose and the objective of the special need for an exclusive institutional arrangement for the Muslim students to receive their education. He wanted learning, all types of learning, to be within the framework of Islam. He believed that knowledge without Islam is not part of Islam. Knowledge for the sake of knowledge is not Islamic. Knowledge for the sake of Allah and His Rasul is the Islamic learning that we are talking about. I think Dr. Shabdi referred to the Surah Iqra, the very first surah that was revealed. Read in the name of Allah. Not only reading, everything to a Muslim should be in the name of Allah. His 24 hours activity of his daily life, every one of them has to be in the name of Allah. This is what T.B. Jaya stood for. This was his vision. Is this what he stood for? Or is it something different? Is a question that the audience has to answer. This answer one cannot find unless we know the life of T.B. Jaya and his contribution in the education of the Muslims of this country. Mr. Chairman, as I told you, I do not agree with this term Muslim education. At the same time, I firmly believe that people like Siddi Labbe, T.B. Jaya and A.M.A. Aziz, the pioneers of education among the Muslim community, they worked for something new. They had a different objective. Their objective was not to produce, not to send merely Muslim students to the medical faculty, the law faculty, the engineering faculty alone. Something more than that. It is that something which brings Islam to education. I always ask the question, what is the difference between a student who enters the medical faculty from Ananda College and a student who enters the medical faculty from Zaira College? They are studying this. If they are studying the same thing, they study the same syllabus, the same curriculum in the medical faculty, then in what way the Muslim doctor will be different from the non-Muslim doctor? In what way the Muslim lawyer or the law graduate will be different from the non-Muslim law graduate? It is not the name that makes the distinction. It is the philosophy that has been built into the personality of a student in a Muslim environment. Can the Muslim schools give that environment? This is the question that we have to ask today. Mr. Chairman, today, what is the distinction between a Muslim school and a non-Muslim school? Except that Muslim teachers are teaching Muslim students. And except for the names that they are bearing. Al-Marjan, Umar Farooq, Khadija, Aisha Vidyalaya, Badiuddin Vidyalaya. What is the difference between Kandy Girls High School and the Kandy Badiuddin Baliga Vidyalaya? In what way the syllabuses are different? What is that these Muslim schools are doing today that the non-Muslim schools are doing, except early morning as the school starts, before the classes begin, they read a few surahs of the Holy Quran, recite salawat, and some schools you find prayer rooms, mosque. At the end of the school, you recite salawat and disperse. Other than that, in what way the Muslim schools are different from the non-Muslim schools? In what way the product of a Muslim school different from the product of a non-Muslim school? There could be very pious Muslim students from good Islamic background, family background, entering Ananda College. What is the distinction between the product of a Muslim product of Ananda College and a Muslim product of Zaira College? These were some of the questions, not that I am asking, these were the questions that T.B. Jaya himself asked. Preservation of the Islamic faith, protection and fostering of the Islamic values, the value system, conversion of the English education for the betterment of the Muslim community and Islam, conversion of the English education so that through the English education we should be able to produce Muslim warriors Muslim revolutionaries, Muslim philosophers, Muslim thinkers, Muslim writers did what he wanted, which he called as Islamization of knowledge. That was the greatest challenge he had. Islamization of the knowledge. Mr. Chairman, we have another problem. We always confuse between the terms knowledge and education. It is used almost as equal, as synonyms. I think knowledge is not learning. Knowledge is different from education. Education is only a science, I believe, a science of teaching. Education is only a science of teaching. We do not in this country have a special science of teaching for the Muslim community. We are not talking about that science. What we are worried is about the Islamic learning, the knowledge, the wisdom, the intelligence. These are different concepts. The concept of intelligence is different from the concept of knowledge, and the concept of knowledge is different from the concept of learning, and all these things put together becomes wisdom, hikmah, in the language of the Holy Quran. So we must have institutional structures which will divert, which will make use of all these aspects of education into a divinely pool. Are we making an effort to achieve this? Mr. Chairman, it was T.B. Jaya who was worried about these problems, and he went, soon after he became a graduate, he made a speech. In that speech that he made in 1919, I believe, on the subject education and national progress, he asked these following questions. What have we achieved? Other communities have achieved so many things. What have we achieved? Do we have civil servants? Do we have scholars? Do we have doctors? Do we have at least a school to call it ours? And he asked the very question, who will be the father, who will be the Sir Syed Ahmad Khan of Sri Lanka? He did not know at that time that history will record and accord him the honor of being the Sir Syed Ahmad Khan of Sri Lanka. So what is important is, Mr. Chairman, is not the mere education as a system. The Muslim community, the time has come to emphasize on more deeper aspects of learning. Today we have been distributed this booklet containing several hadiths of Prophet ﷺ. Muslim scholarship fund, Muslim educationists, Muslim politicians, the time has come, if we have to preserve our identity, if we have to be proud of our identity, the time has come, we should have our emphasis on knowledge. The 19 hadiths I would like to read. Acquire knowledge. This is what the Prophet ﷺ said. Prophet ﷺ has described the nature of the knowledge that the Muslim community has to acquire. A knowledge that enabled its possessor to distinguish right from wrong. There are teachers, educationists. I am asking this question, is today's education, what we teach our youngsters, does it help them to distinguish right from wrong? It lighted the way to heaven. Does the education that we receive or the knowledge we learn help us and serve as the light to the heaven? It is our friend in the desert, our society in solitude, our companion when friendless. It guideth us to happiness. It sustains us among friends and an armor against enemies. It is the Muslims of this country have to now think deeply. I would like to use the words of Dr. Badiuddin Mahmood, who as a young firebrand just out of the Aligarh University, this is what he came and spoke. Those words are still ringing in the ears of those who are concerned with the Muslim community. This is what Dr. Badiuddin Mahmood, young Aligarh product, said. A community must be politically recognized before it could do anything great. And an individual, however great, however clever, however patriotic, cannot honestly feel happy in his individual greatness when the section to which he belongs and from which he derived all his inspiration lies humiliated and relegated to an inglorious place in the political structure of his country. It is therefore the education or the learning of the Muslim community that we are trying to shape today on the eve of the 50th Golden Jubilee celebrations of the Muslim Scholarship Fund. We have a duty to ensure that this education, this knowledge, this learning, this wisdom that we derive will help to retain the individualistic character, the independence and the respect of the minority community in Sri Lanka. Mr. Chairman, one other aspect that we have to address our mind is the question of the mother tongue. I have spoken about Dr. T.B. Jaya, Dr. M.H.M. Aziz. Then we find three other leaders, Dr. M.C.M. Khalil, Sir Razik Farid and Dr. Badiuddin Mahmood. Alhaj late T.B. Jaya gave the religious foundation to the Muslim learning, the Islamic learning. M.H.M. Aziz gave the philosophical foundation to that learning. He was involved and immersed in the writings and teachings of Allama Iqbal. He was virtually a reincarnation, please forgive me for using that word, of Allama Iqbal. He was a living Sufi, and in him radiated the Islamic, everything beautiful in Islam and in the philosophy of Islam. Then the question of, during the last 50 years, a very important question came, which has resulted the latest incident, the abortive attack on our military armory at Slave Island yesterday. The LTTE suicide members of the suicide squad came, blasted themselves. This can be related back to the official language policy of the 1956 era. That official language policy has resulted among the Tamils to a problem of this magnitude, which has today become a national problem. But how many of the Muslims realize the after effects of the official language policy? There was great debate. You had to only read the speeches of late M.H.M. Aziz. I used to borrow books from him. He would ask me to return those books. But one day when he handed over to me his speeches that he made in the Senate on the Official Language Act, he said, this book will be more useful to you than me, therefore you keep it with you. And I still proudly retain that copy of late M.H.M. Aziz's speeches, all his speeches made on the Official Language Act. He was the only Muslim politician, only leader who said that the Muslims should not change their medium of instruction. Muslims must have studied in Tamil language. Tamil should be the medium of instruction. There were great debates. Dr. Badiuddin Mahmood, Sir Razik Farid, those leaders said Muslims have to study in the Sinhala medium. Now how many years have gone? 60, 70, 80, 90, 35 years. 35 years of these 50 years that you have called upon me to deal with, Mr. Chairman, have been in a scenario where the Muslims were not very clear, still not very clear what should be the medium of instruction. What is the result? There was a time that in the Muslim community the language of the home was Tamil. He doesn't study Sinhala. But what is the fate of the Muslim student? He has to study 4 languages. He has to study Tamil, he has to study Sinhala, he has to study English, and he has to also study the Arabic language. Arabic language for the purpose of enabling him and training him to read the Holy Quran. And in addition, he requires a lot more time. The time of the Muslim student. Does he have the time to be involved with the Holy Quran? To indulge himself in the philosophy of Islam? In the life of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? No. Today the result is a new generation has come up. At home there was a time the young girl will call the elder brother as Nana. Now they don't call them as Nana. It has come to the position of calling them Ayya, Malli, Nangi. The result is that the community is getting linguistically divided. In a matter of 10 years, in a scenario where both sections will not study the English medium, where the English will not be known either to the Muslims from the northeast areas or from the other areas, in the absence of a linked language, one cannot prevent the Muslim community getting effectively divided into Tamil-speaking Muslims and Sinhala-speaking Muslims. As far as the language is concerned, there is no problem. Language does not matter. But as I told you, T.B. Jaya opposed the inculcating of the English language together with the Christian philosophy. Today, you can study in any language you like, but do you have the Islamic values, the Islamic literatures in the Tamil language, in the Sinhala language? No. We have just 1 book or 2 books. Can those 2 or 3 books substitute to the mass of literatures, values, philosophies that are found in the Tamil language? Have we made the right decision? Is a matter for the Muslim educated people, learned people to learn, to answer. Mr. Chairman, I have a duty to go on record. I have been associating with our great leader, Dr. Badiuddin Mahmood. I have had differences of views on several matters, but I have my greatest respect. He told me that very recently that he made a mistake in telling the Muslims to study in Sinhala medium, in abandoning the Tamil medium. Why I say this is, you look at the figures of the university. I have with me the figures of the university admission from 1946 up to 1990. From which areas, from which medium Muslims are entering the medical faculty? From which medium Muslims are entering the law faculty, the engineering faculty? Are they entering through the Sinhala medium or are they entering through the Tamil medium? You see, as a result of the medium of language also, the educational progress of the Muslim community, progress of the Muslim education, I say the educational progress of the Muslim community has been retarded. Our percentage is dropping very badly. We do not have proper teachers. I have those figures as well with me, Mr. Chairman. Today there are nearly 2,000 teachers, university teachers. There is a statistics available, published by the University Report of the Commonwealth countries. They say there are 2,000 university staff. Out of them, there are only 29 Muslims. Out of the 29, 6 are ladies, 7 are Arabic lecturers. So you add 7 plus 6, 13, you are left with only 16 of them. Even these 16 are people who entered after 1980. People who entered the university through the Tamil medium, and none of them are holding very senior positions in their respective faculties. Most of them are very juniors. This is one of the reasons that one has to deeply worry and think about it. The language, to what extent it has affected our faith. T.B. Jaya wanted the Islamization of the learning because he wanted to preserve the Muslim faith. We did not become victims to conversion. But today what is happening? Today you go to the mosque on Fridays, you will see all single medium educated boys. They will not enter the halls of the mosque until the iqama is uttered, because they don't understand what the khatib is saying. Once a month, once in 3 months, we find somewhere, some mosque, a sermon will be delivered in the single language. Are we getting ready with the Arabic colleges, madrasas, where we are producing future ulamas? Are you training them at least to deliver and to preach Islam to those who have received their education in the singular media? We are not doing that either. So what is the net result? There will be 2 positively divided communities who call themselves as Muslims, who will not understand the aspirations of one of which will not understand the aspirations of the other. Look at our social life. When the home language is not Tamil, it is something else. Even in marriages, I am not talking about dowry and other matters, sisters. Even questions such as marriages, in marriage, arrangement of marriages, the language becomes a determining factor. So, we've closed all doors, all avenues to bring these 2 sections of the people. Is it feasible from a long-term point of view in a country where the Muslims are a minority? Mr. Chairman, over the last 50 years, today we may be happy that our university admission percentage is increasing. Say from 2%, in the 1980s it had come to 6.8, 7 point. But that is once again a misleading figure. We are entering into areas and disciplines which others have already abandoned and gone. If you take the science streams, arts, engineering and other streams, Muslim admissions is very rare. We are going into areas, arts, commerce, these are the areas where there is no competition and the Muslims are going and finding places in those slots. There is another important factor. I happened to read a research article by Dr. Chandrasekharan, a senior lecturer at the University of Colombo. He is identifying some of the causes of the Muslim learning today, rather the education among the Muslims. One of the main points that he brings forth is that these graduates that whom we are producing today are graduates who become unemployable. In universities are not, from the universities, Muslims are not training themselves to cater to the demand. We are training ourselves to areas where there is no demand. At the GCA level, we are not assisting our students to prepare for the exam. There are economic difficulties. There are a number of Muslim students who are dropping out of the universities. In 1985, according to some survey, there is only 3.9% of graduate teachers in Muslim schools. Only 3.9% compared to 88.2% in Sinhala schools and 7.9% in Tamil schools. Absenteeism. There are ladies, sisters, you must understand, the growing percentage of Muslim girls leaving the schools after they attain their puberty. This is another area where you have to concentrate. Even if everything is okay, but the schools are not properly equipped, we are not concentrating at schools which are producing and preparing students to enter the university. Some of the present problems that we face are the difficulties in finding admission to good schools. As a politician, as a member of parliament, as a leader of a political party, I know what is happening. Every day, number of our friends want admission to good schools. But we are unable to find admissions. Nobody knows what the reason is. When you go to a good school, we are told, well, we cannot admit you, you go to Zaira College. But Zaira College is not a good school, I am sorry to say this. It cannot compete with Royal College or St. Thomas's. Many of my friends come and meet me. I have told them, you ask me to do anything, but don't ask me admission for your children. That has become the most difficult task today. Muslim students are unable to find admission in good schools. In schools like Zaira College, is very unfortunate. Some of us who serve in the committees, I'm not blaming them. If I am there, I may do the same thing. They do not have the confidence to put their own children in the school which they are managing. So with this contradiction around us, how are we going to promote the education among the Muslims? Today, there is the acute necessity for a school, Muslim boys' school in Colombo. So Sri Lanka Muslim Congress has taken up that task. We met Her Excellency the President, who had assured and who had given a directive to establish a Muslim school for the Colombo South boys' school. We know what is happening in Kandy. For the last 16, 17 years, those Muslims who are interested in the education of the Muslim boys in Kandy are finding it difficult to establish a school of their own. And thanks once again to Her Excellency the President, orders have been given. We are trying to locate the land to establish a school in Kandy. Take, for example, what happened in Matale Amina Vidyalaya, the only Muslim school for the Muslim girls. The adjoining land was taken over to put up quarters for police officers. So it was a big struggle. Amidst big struggle, Alhamdulillah, MashaAllah, we succeeded, and on a presidential directive and intervention, the police department was ordered to hand over the school to the Muslims. So the educational standards of the Muslim community have to be built up among lot of problems. There are chauvinistic tendencies that we have to face every day. If we have to retain our individualism and our characteristic as Muslims. There are stepmotherly treatment of Muslim schools on the questions of infrastructure development. We don't get equitable distribution of the resources of the Ministry of Education. These are the problems that we are facing. Mr. Chairman, today, after the 80s, the university admission has increased. Thanks once again to Dr. Badiuddin Mahmood the policy of standardization. Today, there are arguments for and against as to why the standardization has to be done away with. University students have to be selected purely on merits. If that happens, what will happen to the Muslim community and the admission rate of the Muslim students? Are we concentrating on vocational training? Is there an institution to guide Muslim youth to other available areas other than universities, such as law, accountancy, computer technology, etc.? The most important is, Mr. Chairman, the question of backwardness in the English language. Once again, there is this necessity to study the English language. The fear that the English language will convert us does no longer exist, because we are today a republic. We are capable of getting all the good things from the English language. But is there an effort, concerted effort, to teach English to our children? Then once again, they say history repeats itself. We find the plethora of international schools. Now, T.B. Jaya was fighting, Armuga Navala was fighting, Anagarika Dharmapala was fighting against the Christian philosophy coming through English education. But today, we find English education once again entering history repeating itself. And we are giving more importance to English education and the Christian philosophy than the emphasis that we have to place on Islamic philosophy and Islamic environment. Therefore, I felt we are coming back to square number one. I would like to place before this audience some issues as issues for the future. How do we pump in the Islamic philosophy in the curriculum of our modern education? How do we build an effective bridge between the Quran school, the Hifz school, the Arabic madrasas, and Arabic universities like Nalimia and the modern schools? Is it going to be an institutional arrangement, or will it be based on an individual effort? How do we ensure the adoption of a single language for the Muslim homes? Will the present trend of the Muslim homes switching over from Tamil to Sinhala ultimately bring about a permanent divide between the Muslims as Tamil-speaking Muslims and Sinhala-speaking Muslims? To what extent such a development will weaken the political strength of the minority community? If so, what corrective measures should we adopt? If not, are we getting ready to produce Sinhala medium mosques? Medium of education becoming an important factor in the determination of marriages. Total alienation of the Northeast Muslims from the rest of the Muslim community. In other words, the political backbone of the Muslims of Sri Lanka lies in the eastern province. The moment you divide the Tamil-speaking Muslims from the Sinhala-speaking Muslims, the majority of the Muslims, 2/3 of the Muslims, will be minus the political strength. The inadequacy of the Islamic philosophy, the advisability of confining Muslim schools to 100% Muslim students, social adjustment problems, belated understanding of the culture and philosophy of fellow students, total isolation from the rest of the communities. This is one of the matters that I have to just touch. In the eastern province, we see this. There are Muslim schools, 100% Muslims students, not a single Tamil student. There are Tamil schools, 100% Tamil students. There isn't a single Muslim in that school. If you ask a Muslim from the eastern province to prepare a list of his best 100 friends, you will not see a single Tamil name in that. Similarly, you ask a Tamil from the northeast to prepare his list of friends, the first 100, I will take any bet, there will not be a single Muslim in that list. A new generation is coming up. It is unlike the friendship that we have had in the yester generation. Siva, myself, in our area, our generation, there are a number of people. Zaira College, under late A.M. Aziz, produced a generation of people of all communities. They were there. But today, the too much of emphasis and confining the Muslim schools and the benefits of the Muslim schools only to the Muslim students have also led to some of the problems. So in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, the future. The Muslim Scholarship Fund has a positive role to play. It is high time we get rid of the myth of the Muslim education, and the emphasis should be from Muslim education to Islamic learning. It was an educationist, Rose, W.D. Rose, who said, education and philosophy are two sides of the same coin. But I would like to say, learning and philosophy are two sides of the coin. For the Muslim community, the learning on one side, Islamic philosophy on the other side, they have to go as two sides of the same coin. Finally, the final question that we have to ask ourselves is, what is the objective of the Islamic learning? If you ask a Hindu, he will say in Tamil, Sandorai Uruvakudal. In Tamil they say, Sandorai Uruvakudal. That is, you create good people. Objective of education is the creation of good people. Purifying the body, purifying the mind, and purifying the soul. Purity of all three. Perfect man. This is the Hindu philosophy.